Today's date is October 7th, 2020. I actually have several different topics that I would like to talk about in today's video. Today has been a relatively eventful day. I've heard many different things on the news today that just took place, and I would like to talk about them. So originally, today's video is only going to be about the vice presidential debate. As of yesterday, I was planning on making today's video specifically dedicated to talking about that, giving an overview of that. But then I decided to actually include some other topics into today's video because one, today has been relatively eventful, and two, there's actually not that much to talk about with the vice presidential debate. But let's get into the vice presidential debate first and my thoughts on it. Then we can talk about some other topics. So the vice presidential debate is actually starting in just over an hour as I'm speaking. So I would like to get this video uploaded before that begins so that I can watch that debate. I'm hoping that it won't be as much of a mess as the presidential debate. I'm hoping that Mike Pence and Kamala Harris don't interrupt each other as much as Trump and Biden did. It was mainly Trump doing the interrupting, but I don't think Mike Pence or Kamala Harris interrupt each other as much. I don't think they'll do that as much. I'm hoping I'm not wrong about that, but we'll have to see. So this debate's actually taking place in Salt Lake City, Utah, which I'm kind of surprised about because Utah's not really much of a swing state. It's a pretty conservative state. It consistently votes for Republicans in the presidential election. So I'm kind of surprised they chose that as the location, in contrast to where the location they chose last time, which was Ohio. But I think that this debate will definitely be easier to follow with than the previous debate, the presidential debate. Speaking of the presidential debates, I'm actually not sure if there's going to be more of them because originally I thought that Trump has COVID, he has to quarantine, he won't be able to do the debates, but apparently Trump will still be able to. He might still be doing the rest of the presidential debates. Even though the second debate falls within the 14-day period he's supposed to quarantine for, Trump's already said that he's willing to do the second and third presidential debates. The question is now, will Biden be willing to put himself at risk if Trump has COVID but still goes to the debates? We'll have to see. In my opinion, they should at least cancel the second debate and wait till Trump gets better before doing any of the debates. Not just for the sake of Biden, but also for the sake of Trump. Because, like, in my opinion, if you're sick, if you currently have COVID, then you're not going to be thinking straight. The virus is pretty brutal. It's not going to affect you well. And for Trump, I would rather him debate when he's in the best of physical and mental state. And also, obviously, we don't want Biden getting the virus either. So that's there. The moderator of tonight's debate, vice presidential debate, is Susan Page. I don't really know much about her. I don't know as much about her as I did about Chris Wallace, but I know that she has been in the political scene for a long time. She has interviewed the past 9 presidents, so that would be all the presidents since like the 1960s or 1970s. So that would be like since Richard Nixon, I'd say. I think, yeah, Richard Nixon would be 9 presidents ago. So she's been in the scene for a long time. She's 69 years old as of now. So she has been in the political scene for a long time. The thing about the vice presidential debate, though, is I actually don't think the vice presidential debate really matters that much because when you vote for whoever you vote for in the presidential election, the vice presidential candidates might be a slight consideration, but really you care a lot more about who the actual president is. They're going to be the ones that actually make the big decisions, while the vice president is just the one that advises them on those decisions. Personally, I'm thinking a lot more about the differences between Trump and Biden than I am about the differences between Pence and Harris. The vice presidential debate might sway a few people's opinions from one side to another, but I don't think it's going to have much an effect on this debate. So if Pence wins, I still don't think that's going to help Trump overcome his like 8 point deficit at this point in the polls. And if Kamala Harris wins, then I mean she's already doing really well, or Biden's already doing really well in the polls. So I don't think anything's going to change if Harris does well. But in my opinion, that would just give them less pressure because even if either candidate messes up in this debate, there's not really that much on the line for them. What this means is that even if Kamala Harris completely messes up her debate performance tonight, I still think that Joe Biden would have over an 80% chance of winning this presidential election. I don't think how Kamala Harris does tonight, even if she messes up, I don't think that's going to change the fact that Joe Biden has a much, much better chance than Donald Trump of winning the upcoming presidential election. Most people, when they cast their vote in the presidential elections, they're much more thinking about the presidential candidates than the vice presidential candidates. For the most part, the vice presidential candidates are an afterthought for them. I'll admit, in this presidential election, the vice presidential candidates might matter a bit more because both presidential candidates are in their 70s. And Overall, these are the oldest the presidential candidates have ever been in United States history for any presidential election. So there's a higher chance than normal that whoever wins this presidential election dies in office. I really hope that whoever wins this presidential election does not die in office and serves their full term. I don't want that to happen. That would be terrible, but there is a higher chance than normal of that happening, and we have to acknowledge that. And that's one of the reasons why the vice presidential candidates might matter more, might play a bigger role in this election in 2020 than any election in the past. Even then, though, I don't think it really changes. I don't think the vice presidential candidates really change up the dynamic too much. Most people are worrying about Donald Trump versus Joe Biden. Not that many people worry about Kamala Harris versus Mike Pence. That's all I have to say about this topic. Let's move on to the next topic now. I just noticed that the segment that I just did talking about the vice presidential candidates and the vice presidential debate that's coming up in around an hour, I noticed that that took 6 minutes, so I'm not going to spend as much time on the rest of these segments throughout this video. But let's talk about the next segment now. The next thing I would like to talk about is with Derek Chauvin. So he is the cop that killed George Floyd back in May, late May. Back in late May, he laid his neck on George Floyd. He laid his knee on George Floyd's neck, sorry, for over 8 minutes, and that eventually resulted in George Floyd's death. And that is the event that sparked all these protests nationwide that were protesting the police brutality, not only in George Floyd's scenario, but with many other people also, such as Breonna Taylor. But George Floyd's death is what sparked that entire outrage. So it turns out that just this morning, it was announced that Derek Chauvin will be able to be released from prison. The reason being that he was able to raise $1 million, and that $1 million is used as cash bail in order to release him from prison. So he was able to release around $1 million, and now that money is being used as cash bail to make it so that he gets released from prison. This is actually really surprising to me. I did not expect him to be able to raise that much money. It seems like most people across the country utterly despise this guy, and I can definitely see why this is the case. After all, Derek Chauvin killing George Floyd by leaving his knee on his neck for over 8 minutes, that death is what caused all this nationwide protesting in the first place. And this is what really sparked the Black Lives Matter movement. I know that Black Lives Matter has already been a thing for many years, but this is what really got a lot of people to support that movement, this specific death. And this is what got people all across the country to start protesting and advocating for police reform. So I think that the fact that this happened now, I think a lot of people are going to be troubled by the fact that he was able to get out of serving in prison just because of the fact that he was able to raise enough money. And I can kind of see where they're coming from, because just because he was able to raise enough money, he's able to get out of prison. In my opinion, I don't think that the amount of money that a person has should dictate how badly they suffer in prison. I think that it should be equal. The law should be applied equally to all people, regardless of how much money they make. I don't think a person's wealth or a person's income should dictate their punishment in the criminal justice system. But that's all I have to say on that issue. We have more issues to get to, so let's go on with that now. The next thing that I'll be talking about is the Supreme Court case that just took place today. This Supreme Court case took place between Google and Oracle. Now, I'm not really very familiar on the exact details of the Supreme Court case. I just know that Google and Oracle had some sort of disagreement related to something regarding intellectual property. Because I'm not that familiar on this Supreme Court case and what each side of the debate is arguing for, I'm instead here to talk about what this specific Supreme Court case shows about the Supreme Court itself. So I want to point out two things. The first one is the fact that right now we only have 8 Supreme Court justices. Because of the death of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg just a few weeks ago on September 18th, we now have a vacancy in the Supreme Court. So instead of having the normal 9 justices, we only have 8 justices currently serving. And that will be the case until the president nominates a Supreme Court justice and the Senate confirms that justice. So as of now, President Trump has already nominated Amy Coney Barrett to fill that seat, but now the Senate has to confirm that. And that's one of the big debates that's been going on in the last few weeks, whether or not the Senate should confirm her, because Republicans said in 2016 that they should wait till after the election to confirm a new justice after Antonin Scalia passed away. But in 2020, many of those same Republican senators are changing their minds from their stance on the issue in 2016. So that's one of the big debates that's going on right now. But going back to this specific Supreme Court case, so the other thing that I would like to talk about now relating to this Supreme Court case is the fact that many of the Supreme Court justices currently serving have been nominated multiple decades ago, over a decade ago, and some of them over 2 decades ago. The longest serving justice currently is Clarence Thomas, who was nominated during the presidency of George H.W. Bush, which is almost 3 decades ago. And the fact that these people were, most of them were nominated many decades ago, before I was even born, before many of you watching were probably born, they were nominated in a different time than they're currently serving it now. And many of them are above the age of 60, some of them are even above the age of 70, and the oldest one, Stephen Breyer, is age 82. And because of their old age and how long they've been serving, many people have been proposing one of two things. The far more popular option, I think, is to give Supreme Court justices term limits, or not necessarily term limits, but more maximum number of years they can serve. So some people suggest that limit should be like 15 years, some say 20 years, but some people, a lot of people, in fact, I think, are advocating for placing a limit on the number of years a Supreme Court justice can serve. The far less popular option, I think, is giving an age limit on the position of Supreme Court justice. So some people say, like, you can't serve if you're above 80. Once you're 80, you have to retire. And some people say once you're like 75, you should retire. That's the far less popular option that I don't think as many people are advocating for. But I think because of the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg just a few weeks ago, when she passed away at age 87, some people are saying that people who are that old shouldn't be allowed to serve on the Supreme Court, and that they should be forced to retire when they're age 80. And because of today's specific Supreme Court case, which involved all sorts of different intellectual property laws and copyright laws that were affecting technology, many people say that one of these two proposals could help solve the issue of Supreme Court justices not knowing enough about these technologies. And I can definitely see where these people are coming from, because if a Supreme Court justice has been serving since the 90s or early 2000s and they're around age 70 or 80, they probably aren't going to have nearly as good of an understanding of technology as someone who's, let's say, 40 or 50 years old and who has only been serving on the Supreme Court for a few years. Because if a Supreme Court justice was nominated 30 years ago, what that means is that both the president who was serving 30 years ago specifically and the Senate who was serving 30 years ago specifically, the Senate and president at the time thought that the Supreme Court nominee had a good understanding of the law as it was then. But the fact that now they've been serving for that long and they're that old now, they might not have as good of an understanding of modern technology and the modern world and modern law. So that's one of the arguments, that's one of the best arguments I think there is for implementing either age limits or years serving limits, I'd say. I guess serving limits is the term. But personally, I'm not sure if I'm in favor of either of these proposals. Personally, if I were to choose between one of these two proposals, I would much more support the serving limit proposal than the age limit proposal. I would say that the serving limit proposal is both a much more fair way to deal with the problem and also a much more effective way to deal with the problem of a Supreme Court justice not being able to properly interpret the law because they don't have a good enough understanding of the modern world. I think that age isn't necessarily a good indicator of whether or not somebody can accurately do their job as Supreme Court justice, because a 90-year-old could easily do a better job than a 50-year-old of interpreting the law based on modern day standards. So I think that age is not necessarily a good indicator to go off of somebody's effectiveness as a Supreme Court justice. I think that how long they've been serving should be what determines whether or not someone should still be able to serve on the Supreme Court justice. But these are my thoughts on the issue. I highly doubt that either one of these proposals will be implemented anytime soon. The founding fathers, they wanted the job of a Supreme Court justice. They wanted it to be guaranteed for life. So it would be really hard to go back on what the founding fathers said about the Supreme Court justices. But let's move on to the last topic of this video now. And this is a bit more lighthearted of a topic, but it also has some serious discussion to go along with it. Ken Bone, who was a giant meme back in 2016 during that election cycle because of this one question he asked during one of the presidential debates. And also, I think one of the big reasons why he became a meme was because his name sounded pretty funny. But he just announced this morning that he was voting for Jo Jorgensen in this presidential election. She is the Libertarian Party presidential nominee, and despite him voting for Clinton back in 2016, he's decided to not vote for either of the two major parties, instead vote for Jo Jorgensen in this presidential election. In my opinion, the number one problem with America's voting system is the fact that third-party candidates are disincentivized from running, and I think that ranked choice voting would be the solution to that issue. I'm basically out of time for this video now, but I still plan on making a video about ranked choice voting, so look out for that.